Micro Jig, maker of the gripper. Work safer, work smarter.
I have some leftover 8/4 maple from my hall table build that's going to be perfect for the legs for this stool. So the first thing I'm going to do at the joiner is get a nice flat edge, and then we'll cut these to rough width at the table saw. I'm going to cut these leg blanks a little bit thicker than what I actually need. That way I'll have plenty of material to square these up later. With the leg blanks resting, I'm going to turn my attention to the rails. And I'm going to make those also out of maple, and I'm going to cut them to rough width at the table saw. I'm going to cut my leg blanks to rough length at the chop saw. Then at the joiner, I'm going to make two faces nice and square and flat. Then I'll take the other two faces down to thickness at the planer. Before I square up table legs, or in this case, legs for a stool, I always like to make sure that my joiner fence is still a perfect 90 degrees to the table of the joiner. And in my opinion, one of the best ways to do that is with the dial indicator. Let me show you how I do that. With a nice flat surface and a good square and my dial indicator jig, and you'll find more information on my dial indicator jig on my website, and I'll have a link in the description. The first thing we need to do is zero the dial indicator to 90 degrees. All I have to do is slide the square into the dial indicator jig until the square makes contact with this bottom screw, then just zero the dial indicator phase. Right there. So with the jig pushed up against the fence, my fence is off by 0.010 of an inch, so I can make adjustments to my positive stop until the dial reads 0. Then I'll know I'll be at a perfect 90 degrees. Right there. So now with the freshly face jointed side up against the fence, I'm going to square up the second face. So the last step in preparing these leg blanks is to take the non-face jointed side down to thickness by using the thickness planer. Almost there. So with the leg blanks dimensioned to thickness, I'm going to turn my attention back to the rails. So the next thing I need to do is flatten one face and then plane these to thickness. So with one face jointed nice and flat and then plane to thickness, I'm going to go ahead and take one edge nice and square to one of the faces at the joiner, and then I'll cut these to their final width. Because the legs of the step stool tilt towards each other by 8 degrees, and they also tilt toward the inside by 8 degrees, when I go to cut the ends of each side of the leg, I need to tilt my saw blade to 8 degrees, and I also have to have my miter gauge set to 8 degrees. Now I need to cut the legs to length, and I need to make sure that when I cut the second side that I have the leg oriented so that the two ends are parallel to each other. I returned my table saw blade back to 90 degrees, and I left my miter gauge at 8 degrees. So the next thing I need to do is cut the angles on the ends of the rails. I cut the upper rails to length, and I cut two of them 1 inch longer. So this will actually make the base of the stool a rectangle, not a square. Next, I need to determine the length of the lower rails, and this is one of the rails that goes in the front or back of the stool. And I know I want the lower rail to come up 7 inches from the bottom, so I went ahead and laid out two of the legs with the top rail in place, and I'll just place the bottom rail up against one of the legs that has the angle already cut on it, the 8 degrees. Now I know where to make the other 8 degree cut on the lower rail. For the joiner for this piece, I'm going to use floating tenons. Now, because the rails are cut at 8 degrees on each end, when they face the front of the mortiser, I'm going to have the sides of the rails meet the fence or the front of the mortiser at 90 degrees. That way, when the loose tenons are going to the rail, they'll come straight out of the end of the rail and they won't be going in at an angle. For the mortises in the legs, I'm going to again use my horizontal mortiser, and I'm using a shim to shift the leg out from the fence of the mortiser by 8 degrees. That way when the bit goes into the mortise, that the bit runs horizontal to the top of the leg. Now when I do the mortises for the lower part of the leg, the mortises in the lower section of the leg, I'm not going to be able to use the shim and have an 8-degree mortise. For the mortises for the lower rails, I'm not going to be able to use that 8-degree shim like I did before. So I have the leg flush up against the fence, and the bit will just go straight into the side of the leg and down. Now that I have all the mortises complete in the legs, I'm going to make my floating tendon stock. And I'm going to make that out of some scrap 4/4 maple. So after ripping my loose tendon material to width, I took it over to the bandsaw and I resawed it to rough thickness. Then at the planer, I got it a little bit closer to thickness. Now by using my new Grizzly drum sander, I'm going to take it to its final thickness. For my joinery, because the ends of my mortises are round, I need to make the ends of my loose tendon stock round as well. And I'm going to do that at the router table using an 1/8 inch radius round of a bit. One of the best ways that I've found to cut this loose tendon stock material to length is to do it at the table saw using a table saw sled. And I like to use a pencil racer to hold the material down firmly to the sled. I have this stool dry assembled, so there's no glue on any of the joints yet. This was just to check to see how well everything went together, and it went together pretty nicely. So the next thing I have to do will be to shape the legs, and I think I'm going to put a chamfer on the outside corner of each leg, but I'm not exactly 100% sure yet. So I think I'm going to stop part 1 here, and in part 2, which will be the final part of this build series, will be to make the seat, shape the legs, and glue everything together. So I hope you guys will come back for part 2. Thanks for watching.